changes to the sex education syllabus in schools for nearly 20 years, and it will take in the modern realities that children are facing. So this morning we're asking here on Sunrise, where does the responsibility actually lie for teaching children about sex? Is it with parents or is it with schools? Keep your tweets coming in this morning at Sky Sarah Jane. Plenty of you have been in touch, and to discuss this, I'm joined by the parenting author Leah Hughes-Joshi and Antonia Tully from the Safe at School campaign. Good morning to you both. This has generated a lot of interest amongst our viewers this morning, not least because, Antonia, it is the first change in the syllabus for nearly 20 years. What changes do you think the government should introduce for children?
Well, the really big change that we would like to see is the government acknowledging parents and drawing parents into the whole process of sex education. And can I just say that actually the really big change is that the government has made this a compulsory school subject. So that every child in every sort of school, independent schools, state schools and academies, have to learn about sex, have to have sex education lessons.
They've also invited parents and children to be part of the process. There has been a dialogue.
Yes, there is a dialogue now, but what's not going to change is the fact that every child has to have these lessons. So we're hoping that lots of parents do respond to this consultation. We're hoping that parents ask, for example, to have full disclosure about what schools are going to teach their children, for parents to be involved in the decision-making about the content of what their children will be taught. And there's one very critical thing. I do think that parents need to be involved in any discussion about what is age-appropriate, because the campaign that I run, parents who get in touch with me feel their children are not having age-appropriate lessons on this subject.
So that's two big issues you've raised there. One is that it's going to be compulsory in schools, and Leah, as the mother of a 12-year-old boy, does that bother you?
It doesn't at all, and I think sex education and relationships education should be compulsory in schools, because we can't rely on all parents to do it properly. Now, I'm not for a minute saying it's either or. This is about both schools and parents helping children cope with the quite complicated landscape they are going to be having relationships in. And not all parents are familiar enough, even if they want to be, with things like sexting and with the challenges children face and the things they are able to see on the internet these days. We cannot protect our children entirely from this sort of material, so we don't equip them to deal with it.
But they're being exposed at a younger age now than 20 years ago to sex in all its forms. So what age do you think would be appropriate to start teaching children about sex, whether it be at home or at school? I mean, as a mother, as I said, a 12-year-old, what age do you think he would have been most open and most able to deal with this kind of information?
I always say to parents, if your child is old enough to ask questions about sex, then they are old enough to receive an appropriate answer. But it's got to be an age-appropriate answer, and you've got to respond to them. Now, the problem I have, the problem I have with those who say we shouldn't be teaching this in schools at all, is that not everyone can make that call. And some parents, and I know some personally, have strong religious beliefs or strong cultural beliefs that make them assume that their child isn't going to have any sexual relationships at all.
That's quite interesting, because it's
brush it under the carpet.
It's very subjective, because, Antonia, parents might not often be in the best case to judge whether their children are ready for sex education, because let's face it, it doesn't matter, you know, when you were a child, you always knew a little bit more than you would let on to your parents, and you did get a lot of information from your peers. So how do we judge what is age appropriate?
Well, I think parents actually are the best judges of when their children are ready to hear about sexual matters. I've got 6 children, and every single one of them has been different. We've approached the issue in a different way at a different stage of that child's development. What compulsory sex education does is impose on children a blanket, right, age 7, you are going to learn about this.
Okay, but
and I don't think that's the role of the school.
What if a parent said, I don't want my child to have any sex education?
Well, up until the fact that it was made compulsory, parents did have the right to withdraw their children so that they had the freedom to talk about this issue in their own way
Some
with the
parents
child.
don't, though, as Leah pointed out. Some parents aren't comfortable.
I think it's
don't want
very-
to. It could be for religious reasons. So the child needs guidance from somewhere. If it's not getting it at home,
I think there are
it's not getting
very
it at
few
school.
parents who don't want to protect their children from the very aggressive, explicit sex education that's in schools.
But
And
it's
every
protecting and there's
parent will
information, isn't
find
there,
their
Leah?
They
way
need to be-
to talk to their own child within their own cultural context about these sensitive and delicate matters.
But it's
so
the
don't
parents'
underdo
cultural
parents.
context. It's not necessarily the child's cultural context. And at the end of the day, you might want to protect them from ideas and knowledge that you don't agree with, but they're going to see that anyway in the current climate, the landscape they inhabit. They're going to hear about these ideas from the internet and from their peer groups. So surely it's better to equip them with the knowledge and understanding to let them have healthy sexual and general relationships.
On that point, Antonia, there is a problem because statistics have been coming out in recent months about the scale of the problem about a lack of sex education amongst young children. There was a YouGov statistic, half of young people aged 16 to 24 don't use any protection with a new partner. 1 in 10 say they have never used any protection. And attitudes to sex as well. There was a survey done in secondary schools. These are figures from October. 30,000 cases reported in the last 4 years of child-on-child sex assaults in schools, and sexual harassment is seen as rife in schools. That's coming from the National Education Union. A recent report says 1 in 3 girls in a mixed secondary school felt sexually harassed. So there is a culture and problems here that need to be addressed within
Absolutely.
schools.
There are problems, and what we've been saying for years now is that we don't think that the sort of sex education that's delivered in schools is tackling those problems. A lot of sex education is very explicit, it's very provocative, and it's paving the way for sexual activity. And I don't
But
think
education in schools, if girls are being groped in secondary school, a school has to clamp down on that, and that comes with education about sex, relationships, consent. If it's not taught at school, these children clearly aren't getting sorted at home, so the school has to step in on behalf of the pupils that are being harassed.
Giving them that information doesn't lead to children engaging greater sexual activity at an earlier age. All the research shows that actually being informed about sex education and healthy relationships leads to less risky behaviour amongst teenagers and young adults.
I absolutely disagree. For example, there has been a decline in teenage pregnancies, but all the evidence points to the fact it is nothing to do with sex education. Higher educational outcomes, children going to school and studying, that is what the key factor in bringing down teenage pregnancies. So I think schools have been made highly sexualised environments. I don't think it's helping with all the sexual problems that are occurring in schools. And what we want to see is a programme that is placing parents right at the centre of this issue, because they're the ones who are most invested in their children, and they're with their children for a much longer period of time than the schools, and they can deal with it.
Okay, it is a talking point, and as you can see, a very passionate one this morning. Schools or parents, have your say, news at sky.com, or tweet me at SkySarahJane. Antonia, Leah, thank you very much for coming in to speak to us here on Sunrise this morning.